Hello everybody, my name is Gervase Markham. I'm with Mozilla and I'm here to talk to you about something we're doing called Secure Open Source. Now, a few things before we start. First of all, very happy to take questions at any point. So if you have a question of clarification, just stick your hand in the air. And if I can't see you because the lights on this stage are ridiculously bright, then jump up and down or wave or do a dance or something until you get my attention. The second of which is that unfortunately I have a bit of a long-term cough, which is normally okay, but when I get a cold at the same time, it has the effect of making the coughing really quite spectacular. So if I look like I'm dying on the stage at any point, I mean actually physically dying as opposed to just getting a really bad reaction from my audience, if I look like I'm dying on the stage, then please don't call an ambulance unless I actually collapse on the ground. Okay? So if I'm out on the ground, go get help. If I'm just doubled up in coughing fits, then just it'll all subside in a moment and everything will be fine. Okay, brilliant. Having sorted that out, let's get going. Now, we at Mozilla, like all of you, have been observing events over the past couple of years, and we think that there is a problem in open source. And that problem is that open source code in general is not as secure as it could be and it should be. Now, they say that with many eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, but bugs like Heartbleed, which was talked about here in the previous session, shell shock, and other things like that, seem to suggest that the right eyeballs are not looking at the moment in the right places. And we wanted to do something about that because we feel that the better open source software it is, the better it is for the world. And so we are asking ourselves over the past year, how do we prevent the next Heartbleed? How do we make it so that the next time half the internet goes down, it's due to a piece of proprietary software and due to a piece of open source software, not due to a piece of open source. Of course, it'd be better if half the internet didn't go into a security panic at all, but it feels better if it's not your fault as a community. So, seriously then. So we see this problem and we want to do something about it. And we identified a need to make open source software more secure. Now, about 10 years ago, Mozilla was a pioneer of something that's now very popular called bug bounties. Bug bounties, we started a bug bounty program in 2004 on a very small scale with some money from a sort of chap who some of you may have heard of called Mark Shuttleworth. Just as he was starting Ubuntu, he also gave us some money for our first bug bounty program. And we still run a bug bounty program today. This is where, when security researchers come to us with security problems in our software, we pay them some money as a thank you on the basis of the severity of the problem and if they have disclosed it to us responsibly. And bug bounties are great, but they're also a reactive measure. You sit there and you wait for people to come and say, I found this problem, I found that problem. What can we do, we asked ourselves, which is a bit more proactive? How can we be going out there and solving these problems before people come to us with them one at a time? And so our solution was a thing which we're putting together called Secure Open Source Fund. And the general aim of this is that we will find open source projects, not necessarily ones used by Mozilla, not necessarily ones that we rely on, but open source projects which are important to the health of the internet. And I'll talk a little bit more about the criteria in a minute. And we will offer them a professional security audit done by a professional security auditing firm. That firm will then produce a report, and we will work with the maintainers of that project to fix the issues found, which will then be the fixed software will then be distributed as normal in their normal security release distribution process. So codebase by codebase, we are hoping to make the open source world better, one codebase at a time. Now, the context for this program, at least the context for me talking about this program, is something that happened on Friday. Did anyone hear about Mozilla doing a thing called MOS on Friday? One, not so, two, three people. Well, On Friday, Mozilla announced a program called MOS, which stands for Mozilla Open Source Support. And the idea of MOS is that Mozilla is an organization which stands on the shoulders of giants. We can do what we do, building a fully fledged browser and a fully fledged mobile operating system, only because we rely on the code from many other open source projects around the internet as components of Firefox and of components of Firefox OS, and we rely on the code of yet more open source projects around the internet when we put in place the infrastructure to support those products and when we do our daily work. So there are many, many bits of software and organizations, and we've actually started to compile a list, and it's getting longer and longer, that we rely on to do our jobs. And we thought, wouldn't it be good if we were able to give back in some sense, to show our gratitude to those projects for the way in which they've supported us in what we're doing. And so we decided to start a grants program, and the first track of which is particularly focused on software in that category, software that Mozilla uses or Mozilla relies on. We thought $1 million was a nice round number, so we started the fund at that size, although it may get topped up in the future. And the aim is to design the program. That's what we're doing right now, getting input from the Mozilla community on exactly how this program should work. And then in a week or two's time, we'll open applications. The idea is that an application can be submitted by a project lead in collaboration with a Mozilla champion, who is someone within Mozilla who knows about Mozilla's use of that software and is able to vouch for that project and how important it is to do whatever the project has applied to do, and that the money would be well spent. So we just launched that program. And SOS Fund has been in the pipeline for a little bit longer than MOS, but is going to fit into the MOS framework as a track of open source support. So there's this track, which is software that we use and rely on. There's the securing open source track, which is particularly focused on security. And later there may be another track, which is about a software that we don't necessarily use or rely on at Mozilla, but which we think is great and that there should be more of, or that are doing things that we'd like to see happen. So that'll be a more general program. But that one isn't in place yet. We're starting with these first two. So that's the context. We've launched MOS, and secure open source will be a strand of MOS. So then, back to secure open source then, which is what this talk is billed as being about, because we plan to give it before we launch MOS. How do we select the projects that we're going to give audits to? Well, we have a number of criteria, some harder and some softer. The two hard criteria really are that, first of all, it has to be open source, FSF list or OSI, or both. And secondly, the software has to be maintained. Now, the fact that the internet deeply relies on some unmaintained software is a problem, and it's a difficult problem, and it's not the problem that we're solving with this program. It would be great if we could solve that problem, but we're not addressing it, because a core part of our methodology is working with the maintainer. Because if you audit and produce fixes for an unmaintained bit of software, you de facto become the maintainer. And that seemed to be outside the scope of what we wanted to do. So those are the two hard criteria, that it has to be open source software and it has to be maintained. But then we have some other criteria which are a bit softer, and these are sort of factors, if you like, that we would take into consideration when deciding whether a project was a good candidate for SOS or not. So how commonly used is it? But also not how commonly used is it, but how commonly used is it in an internet-facing way? So we're particularly concerned here about the security of the internet and people on it. And so software that is internet-facing gets a sort of a higher score, as it were, in our evaluation than software that is not, or that is less internet-facing. How vital is it? How important is it to the internet? How widely used? How actively maintained it is. I mean, there may be software that's nominally maintained, but the maintainer is not good at engaging. Is the maintainer supportive of the application to SOS Fund? Does it depend on closed source code? If a bit of software also talks to a proprietary web service, that makes auditing it more difficult, because there's some parts of the system you don't have access to. So that would probably discourage us a little bit from picking that bit of software. Has it been audited before? And if so, what was found? And also whether it has corporate backing. So say, for example, a bit of software like Java is very widely used on the internet and could probably do with an audit, but Oracle can pay for their own. Audit then. So once we've identified projects, we negotiate with the maintainer and make sure that they're interested in actually having this done, and then we pass off the code base that's agreed to an audit firm. Now you actually have to decide which code base to audit, which is not necessarily a trivial thing. For a start, some projects have multiple code bases, but also, there's the development trunk, which is good because it's the latest thing, but it may also have issues in it which we found anyway through testing before release. Then there's the latest the latest released version, which is good because it's a stable known point that people will be using. But on the other hand, the auditors may end up finding issues that have been fixed already. So we have to pick which code base to audit based on those balance of criteria. In our initial alpha trials of SOS Fund, we had 3 projects that we were thinking about, and in the end we did an audit of one of those. That was done by a German audit company called Cure 53. I don't know if anyone's heard of them. They're a well-respected audit firm. And they actually finished that audit last Friday. So that's 4 days ago now. And this is what they found in this product we audited. So 1 critical issue, 5 medium severity issues, 20 low issues, and 3 bits of information which they felt they had to tell us about but didn't present a problem, like out-of-date or incorrect comments, that kind of thing, just stuff they found when reviewing the code. The critical issue was a stack buffer overflow, so if you were able to provide the right input to this particular library, you could overflow the stack and execute arbitrary code. The medium issues, there were 2 race conditions, 1 buffer overflow that was a bit harder to exploit, an uninitialized stack read, and an out-of-bounds pointer read. So that's the sort of thing that we're finding. Now, I'm not going to tell you which bit of software we audited, because the maintainer is working on fixing these issues, and we'd rather he fixed them before we reveal which particular bit of software it was. But this is a library that is widely used in a number of different products which have internet exposure. So we were very glad to be able to find these issues, because who knows who else has found them, and we'll be working with the maintainer. So then, yes, the next stage is remediation. How is it that you... Yes?
Can you explain a little bit what was part of the audit? Was it just a static analysis, or did some actual humans look into it?
Yes, that's a very good question. The question was, what did the audit consist of? Was it just static analysis, or did humans look at the code? And the answer is that the audits that we are doing are not based on automated tools. Now, there's a lot of sort of tools out there which will claim to audit your code for security vulnerabilities, and some of them may even find useful things. Those tools are run by a large number of people over a large number of code bases. But we were focused on manual audit, so actual people reading the actual code, working out how it worked, and applying their particularly suspicious and nasty little brains to figuring out how this code could possibly be abused in nefarious ways. And fortunately, these people are on the side of good, and so they report any issues they find to us. But yes, it was not. It's not just a case of running this fuzzer or running that static analysis tool against the code. It is actual people reading the code. This is the core part of what happens in the audits that we're thinking about. So then, remediation. Once we have found, we've got this report from the auditor, which has these 29 issues in it, and those need to be resolved. And there's a number of, we're very flexible on how this could be done. We'd be working with the maintainer. We could say to the maintainer, would you like to remediate this? Are you going to work on these? Or they might nominate someone on their team who might do it. Or if it turns out that the changes are quite significant and the maintainer doesn't have time, then it may be that we get a third party to come in and we contract them to fix the problems. We're open to all of these options, and in each case we're very happy to to remunerate the person doing the work, the maintainer or someone else, for their time. We don't feel it's reasonable to drop a lot of money to the audit firm and say, give us an audit report, and then say to the maintainer, here's a bunch of stuff, fix this on your own dime. So, we think that it's reasonable to reward the maintainer for the work that they put in fixing the issues that we found. They may choose to say, no, it's all part of the service, and that's fine too, more money for more audits, but we are very happy to pay the maintainer if they would like to be paid. So then once the issues are resolved in that there are patches for them, most software projects which are internet-facing have a security release process and will do responsible disclosure and that kind of thing, and we would expect to piggyback on top of those processes where they exist. If they don't exist, we may work with a project to establish such a process with them. In the future, then, having just done this one audit, we want to take that through to the end of this process. We finished the audit report. The maintainer is probably going to do the remediation themselves in this case, so we will wait for that to happen and then we'll do a release. But we'd also like to take another couple of projects through the process to further prove the idea. And if we feel that this is something that has legs and it's looking encouraging so far, then we will attempt to obtain additional funding and just keep going. After all, there's always more open source software. I doubt we'll ever get to the end of the list. One vision that we do have, though, is that we hope that other companies, particularly those that run bug bounty programs, will see the value of proactive rather than reactive work on their software. So maybe one day, perhaps, and we hope that Mozilla will also get to this place, for every £1 you pay in a bug bounty, you put another £1 into a pot, and it could be with us, SOS Fund, or it could be another pot that you have, to pay for proactive auditing of source code that is relevant to your organisation. So for every £1 you pay because someone found something, you put another £1 into a pot to try and make sure that they can't find stuff in the future. So that is sort of our hope and our vision, and we hope that, you know, there's a lot of money being paid out in bug bounties. If we could get that much money equivalently put into audits and some sort of systematic way of working through the most important pieces of open source software that there are, we think in 2 or 3 years' time, the open source security story would be significantly better than it is today. So what's the application process? Well, unfortunately, and I'm sorry if this disappoints anyone, there isn't an application process as such. We have those criteria and we do some analysis, and we tend to go up to maintainers and tap them on the shoulder and say, "Psst, like an audit," and see what they say. But we are open to suggestions. So if there are particular pieces of software you know of that you think fit our criteria, that are, you know, commonly used, internet-facing, maybe have a spotty security track record, maybe not, could do with an audit, you think the maintainer would be supportive, then feel free to come and see me afterwards privately and make some suggestions. I'd be very happy to listen to that. But there isn't an application form or process like that. So different tracks of MOS, which I was talking about earlier, Mozilla Open Source Support, will have different ways of deciding how we disperse the money. In the other case, there is an application process, but for this case, there isn't. Okay, so that is the secure open source program in a nutshell, and I'm happy to take questions about that or about MOS in general, or anything else you'd like to ask. Yes?
So, I don't know much about this world, this might be a silly question, but why use external auditors as opposed to like recruiting a team or becoming experts yourselves to do the audits yourselves?
So the question was, why use external auditors rather than recruiting a team yourselves? So you're saying that Mozilla should recruit a team of people to do the audit, or do you mean you should ask the maintainers of the software to? No, the former. Right. Well, there are existing companies with expertise in security auditing who are all set up and have people who have done this many times before. They know how to produce the right reports. They know where to look, all that kind of thing. Now, we could attempt to recruit some of those people ourselves, but that would lead to two things. First of all, we'd have to give those people full-time work, so we'd have to have a certain level of audit stuff. We'd be effectively becoming an audit firm ourselves. And certainly with the size the program is at the moment, we couldn't justify bringing people on board to do that. It's much better to contract that out. I mean, if SOS Fund became big enough that we could hire our own in-house team of auditors, then that would be a significant sign of success. But certainly in the alpha phase, we're not there yet. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Kind of down the same track, because I was wondering if the methodology and the strategies used in these previews wouldn't be nice to have in the open, like the source code itself.
Yeah.
Also, you're in fact doing these kind of previews.
Mm-hmm.
What are you looking for? There must be some kind of best practice.
Yes. So the question is, wouldn't it be good if the methodology and the way that these security audits are done was also open and made available so that other people could learn how to do it and do that? That is an interesting idea. I don't know what documentation there is out there on the process of security auditing. I suspect people have written books and that kind of thing. Yes?
Well, we can just call it open protocol. It's like there's an open source code, you'll have the open protocol.
Right. I mean, I'm sure best practice in security auditing varies very much depending on your language and also over time. And one of the advantages of employing a firm to do it is that they're the ones who keep up with this best practice and they're the ones who have the experience. I mean, I could go to the firm and say, hi, we just paid you to do an audit. Can you now publish how all of the ways that you do it so that other people can do it and we don't have to pay you anymore? I'm not sure quite how they'd react to that. It would be great if more knowledge about how to do security audits was open. I mean, there's certainly a lot written on secure coding. Maybe we should start by getting developers to read that and then worry about the audit part later. Yes, at the back.
You talked about which development strategy, whether it's a release one or a development one.
Yes.
Did you say what the one you just done, which approach you take?
Yes. So, yeah.
You see the role of Mozilla to be an educator. Picking up on what they're saying there, is once you've found defects, to almost make case studies so other people can then benefit from similar.
Okay. So there were two questions, one of which is what did we do with the first audit that we did in terms of deciding which code base to audit? And the second was, do we see Mozilla in the role of an educator, helping people to understand the sort of defects that are found? Well, in the first thing, what we did was this particular project, we did the trunk code base. And the reason for that is that it had recently had some fuzzing done, which had found a number of issues, and we didn't want the auditors to re-find all the same issues. So we did the trunk. For the second question, the audit reports will be published. Once the fixes are in and the disclosure is done, the full audit report will be made available, which will allow people to see the sort of bugs that were found and hopefully, pick up on that. But actually, at least reading through this first report, the sort of bugs that have been found are the sort of bugs you always find. It's not like we've discovered any new classes of vulnerability or that kind of thing that would be kind of like, oh, no, I need to bear that in mind. In a sense, that the problem is that people are not, and you could argue that it's an issue with languages or an issue with tools, but people are not able or not managing quite completely to write code in the known secure ways. So the question was, is that not disappointing that people are making the same mistakes? And I would say perhaps, but this is the world that we live in, and I would much rather we find these and fix them than just go, oh, well, we'll just let all this software be insecure until coders get the hang of making secure software first time round. So in the middle there.
What about the future? So we start this MOS initiative now for the first round, as far as I understand, and will it become to a constantly institution? And if yes, in which sequences you will perform these activities?
So the question was, in the now it's part of MOS, will you keep going, and what order will you do things in? And I think the answer is that it will be a rolling program. So we will, as we bring in additional funds, we will set off additional audits through the process. So we will maybe have different people at different stages at different times. And of course, for a larger code base, the audit will take longer. For a code base with more systemic problems, the remediation phase will take longer. So trying to kind of match them up as they march through the process probably doesn't have much advantage. So I think we will just do audits as the funds become available and just sort of kick them off down the road, and then it takes as long as it takes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Right here.
I have a question to the mitigation process. How do you deal with won't fixes?
How do you deal with won't fixes is the question. So this is where you think the auditors have come up with a problem, but the maintainer denies that it's a problem? That is a really good question. I guess we'll have to figure that out when that happens for the first time. I suppose if the,
Do you plan to publish that?
well, I think if a maintainer flatly denies that a particular problem is a problem, the first thing we might do, actually, is try and find somebody, either the auditors or someone within Mozilla, to develop some exploit code. Because if they manage to produce a working exploit, that might help to encourage the maintainer or discourage them from their view that this wasn't actually a problem. But I think if we reached a complete impasse, then eventually we would say, well, okay, if you don't think it's a problem, we can tell people about it, right? And he would have to say yes, because I don't think it's a problem. So, yeah, I think we probably would end up publishing it. But that's completely off the top of my head, and we'd have to. It's a slightly odd situation, certainly. So we'd have to kind of decide when we got there. There was another question? I thought I saw another hand go up. No? Okay, going once, going twice. I don't want to stand between you and beer, and I know this is the last session of the day. So thank you for listening, and have a nice evening.